People who have had a creepy feeling about someone come true. What happened? When I was in elementary school, we often had a colleague of my mom visiting us. Her oldest son was my age, so he always came with her to play with me. I could not stand him. He seemed nice and well mannered, but something about him just gave me the chills. It was just an overall feeling that even though he was really nice to me and everyone else, that it felt like he was just acting everything. I avoided being alone with him and never told anyone how I felt about him. I was really glad when his and my mom argued about some stupid crap. She thought my mom badmouthed her to other colleagues, which my mom denied, and the visits stopped. They never rekindled their friendship, and my mom started to work at another company a few months later, and that was the end of it. Fast forward 11 years. My mom read in the newspaper about them. The well-mannered and nice son stabbed his mom to death for apparently no reason. My old manager. I always got a sinister vibe from him, and although everyone else seemed to love him and he was a funny guy, I always had this sort of dangerous vibe from him that kept me on edge around him. 3 months later, he became my direct manager and trapped me in a room and groped me on literally the first day. My mother's ex-boyfriend. They met online and only communicated on the phone and through text for a solid year before they actually met in person. First time I met him, I knew something was off about him, but my mom was happy, so I brushed it off thinking nothing more would come about it because they live so far apart. 6 months after they met, she announced she was moving out of state to go live with him. Again, something wasn't right about this, having only met in person once, but she's an adult and can make her own decisions. I barely spoke to her after she moved. She never returned calls or texts, and when she did, it was always cut short and no details about how everything was going. About 8 months after she moved, I get a call from her while I'm at work. She's in the hospital with a broken arm and claims she fell, but I can barely understand what she's saying. Her voice was faint and crackly. She tells me she's coming to visit and asks if she can stay with me for a few weeks. I knew something was terribly wrong. She shows up at my door days later and is black and blue from head to toe. Her voice was faint because this butthole had choked her and his handprints were still visible around her throat. And yes, he was the one that broke her arm. Turns out, this guy was still married. Not only that, but he had embezzled a bunch of money from the insurance agency he worked at and hasn't filed taxes in years. My mom found out all of this after she got home from work one day and found his wife waiting for him on their doorstep. Guy comes home. My mom confronts him. He beats the crap out of her. Fast forward to a month later when my mom finally returns to their house to get her stuff and move. He's nowhere to be found. A few suits and essentials are missing, but basically everything else is still there and his phone is disconnected. My mom calls his brother to ask what she should do with all of his belongings, and his brother tells her that he has upped and moved to another state with another woman he has been seeing for nearly a year, and to just get out of there and not worry about him or his things. The woman he moved in with did some digging and found his wife's number, who proceeded to tell her everything. She also called my mother to apologize and called the authorities. He somehow catches wind of this and never returns back home. No idea where he's at now, but we Google his name and info every so often to see if he's been found yet. When I was 6 or so, my older brother, 11 or 12 at the time, was involved in this community kids club thing for tween boys. They met in our basement. The group leader was this guy, maybe 30, who was some kind of generic Cub Scout leader, without really being a scout. They would play games and talk about their lives and hobbies, etc. I was much younger and a girl, but I wanted to play too. He was always really serious and stern with me, and told me I couldn't be there in my own basement. He would literally stop the meeting and politely but firmly ask me to leave. Even as a little kid, I got a weird vibe about that. We found out years later that the dude was a pedophile particularly attracted to teen boys. He was arrested for having a bunch of pornography and assaulting a boy. My brother said nothing ever happened in the basement, but a lot of shoulder touches and such. Still creeps me out. I had a neighbor who just needed a quick ride down to the gas station. I had seen him around and he also talked with my really nice neighbors. Plus I have pepper spray and I'm pretty confident if something went wrong because he was a big dude who couldn't run. I gave him the ride because he was putting in a job application. In the 5 minutes he was in the car with me, he asked me out to dinner 3 times. He moved to another apartment in the complex and now is my immediate neighbor. He just got caught of groping 2 children in our complex and a worker at Wendy's. Police have been called and he didn't get arrested. This is not his first time either. So yeah, now I have a pedo living next to me and my pocket knife stays under my pillow and pepper spray next to my bed when I go to bed. How they are letting him live in this building is beyond me, considering there is children and he got caught selling drugs in the laundry room. Like, kick him out already please. Well, I guess I was the one the creepy feeling was about. When I was little I always slept in a crib at my parents' house. My dad was always fast asleep and nothing could wake him up fast. One night, as I have heard, he just woke up in the middle of the night, screaming my name, ran to my bed and picked me up, turned around, and as he walked away lightning hit the roof and the window broke and fell on the bed I was sleeping in. His dad's senses were on fire. Wrong way to overly trust strangers. BC everyone has a story. While I agree, it doesn't mean you let in obvious hard drug users who claims to have killed people. Long story short, the guy ended up killing his 65-year-old girlfriend. Long story short, the guy ended up killing his girlfriend. That must have been one heck of a wake-up call. Another thing was my local town bridge end. A guy who had made some money came back and wanted to give something to the town. Not sure who or why, but must have been music related because he put on a show and booked Fall Out Boy to play our town hall. I'm sure people will laugh at that, but it was a big deal for a lot of kids and was big for the community. At that show, Ian Watkins was there walking around the back of the hall trying not to be noticed. We all noticed him and he was just putting his hands around girls when they asked for a photo. Like hands over the shoulder across their tee. We just thought he was creepy with girls, but when the kids stuff came out it was shocking but not shocking. If any girl had any experience like this, I'd like to hear it firsthand. I definitely saw him doing it and felt a really odd vibe. As soon as Bridgend was mentioned I knew where this was going. Not me, but my wife. She is a teacher and had an elementary student who creeped her out from day one. He was manipulative, always trying to get his work done by copying other students' papers, and generally just a little odd. Partway through the school year, his mom had a manic depressive episode and killed herself. 2 years later, the student blew part of his hand off making a pipe bomb. A year after that, he was left unsupervised with a kindergarten-age student, who, ironically, my wife would also later have as a student, and molested her. He's in juvie now, though he should be out before he's 17. 2 years later, the student blew part of his hand off making a pipe bomb. Arts and crafts have changed a lot since I was in elementary school. This is creepy in a different way than most here, but I think it's relevant. 20 years ago, when I was a practicing Christian, my church got a new priest. He may as well have been God himself the way people fawned over him. I liked him at first too. Then, after a few brief conversations, I got this feeling that his entire life was a major power trip, and he was in no way cut out to lead a congregation of actual human beings. After he made an off-the-cuff remark to me about being divorced, the shock, I was like, later dude, and transferred to another church. People thought I was nuts, because how could I not adore Father Perfect the way they did? After a few months, I noticed a trickle of people from my former parish in my new church, and that trickle eventually became more like a flood. Father Perfect had formerly been a highly respected surgeon with a god complex, and he was quite used to giving orders and having them carried out without question, as I would imagine is necessary in a surgical suite. Not the best quality for a man of the cloth. Eventually he drove out several deacons, the choir leader, the sexton, and about half the congregation. He put a message on the church answering machine about what types of messages could and couldn't be left. Total control freak who apparently mistook himself for God. He finally left after the parish completely fell apart. Surgeons do not make good priests. I had an engineering teacher who acted quite weird around girls and was always organizing girl-only trips because more girls needed to be in engineering. We all thought it was weird, called him the nonce of the school. Come back after summer to find out he was arrested for having indecent images of girls and children on his laptop and blamed it on the school kids. 1. There was a guy I went to high school with who always seemed a bit creepy. He was dating a freshman girl, same grade as me, during his senior year. I believe he was at the school for 5 years total. He posted videos on Facebook of them together that were supposed to be cute, but he seemed more like a pedo in them. One time she got in trouble for being late to class, so he barged in the classroom and screamed at the teacher. Eventually the girl broke up with him and he went nuts. Now I am 2 years out of high school. The guy just got arrested because he was molesting a little girl that lived with his family. The news story said she's now 13 and the molestation started in 2010, so she would have been 5 years old at the time. I was a freshman in 2012. He was molesting a little girl while I went to school with him. 2. I never personally met the kid, but one of my co-workers had a younger brother that she never really talked about. Her friends said the brother was quiet and weird. My co-worker had cerebral palsy and was deaf, but with implants. Last November, she came home from work and he wanted to go walk in the woods with her. He ended up strangling her with a belt and stabbing her multiple times until she died. He then dumped her body beside their trailer park dumpster. He went to a neighbor's house covered in blood and told the neighbor someone had broken into his house and killed his sister. The police eventually figured out that he did it. Since he's a minor, the case is very hush-hush, so I don't know if he ever admitted a motive. I worked at a sex offender domestic violence counseling office, and probably have been there for about 4 or 5 years at the time. There are times when I'm the only person there, with a bunch of sex offenders or domestic violence offenders, which didn't bother me after a few years. Out of the hundreds of men that we have had as clients, one scared me to be alone in the office with, much less my personal office. He made me the most uncomfortable, and I knew everyone's files and some of our clients had worse offenses. Anyway, he was finally terminated from the program, and I testified at his hearing for my boss. I told the judge that he needed to go back to prison. He was aggressive and refused to participate in group. That if the judge was to release him, he would no doubt re-offend within 3 weeks. Judge said I didn't know what I was talking about, and our office was just out for money. He owed a lot, and released him. Within a week, he violently raped his niece. That judge is disgusting. At my underwater hockey club there was this creepy guy who got forced to leave. Cut to a couple of years later, busted for much child pee. At your what? This one was years ago, but it came up recently, which is why I am using this one. I was around 15 when I was taken to a hotel party. I knew some people and some I didn't. Everything was fine. Everyone was hanging out. When all of a sudden I felt sick to my stomach. Went outside to catch some air and my friend followed. I told him I wanted to leave. He obviously didn't, so he tried to sway me. For some reason I had the urge to just get loud with him. And I did. Please, I don't want to be here, I want to leave now. I want to go home. So we left. Not long after, the party was raided and some pretty hardcore stuff was found. Everyone was arrested. I was on probation at that time, so anything would have fricked me. Fast forward 17 years later and my friend gets married. Meet her husband for the first time and he won't stop staring at me. It gets to the point where I feel very uncomfortable. I start trying to cover my shoulders and cleavage. Maybe my tattoos are being judged. Something. Turns out he was there that night. Rookie cop. He was parked in the lot below us and heard my argument with my guy friend about wanting to leave. He was supposed to report anyone leaving that room so that the cops parked at the entrance knew to stop the car. But because he overheard my yelling, he assumed I was a good kid in the wrong place at the wrong time and never called the cops at the exit. So we were able to drive through with weed and alcohol on our breath. That one came full circle after a long time. The wedding was a couple months ago. I'm glad he didn't stop us. I was going through a rough time after my brother had passed, and getting booked while on a stupid probation charge for fighting would have put me on a downward spiral. Wow, that's an incredible story. Good on that guy for doing his best to look out for you. I used to work at a kids program when I was 16. There was a guy who volunteered there in his mid-30s. I want to say he seemed normal, but he really didn't. He looked weird, smelled weird, and he always gave me a really icky vibe. Think Bubbles from the Trailer Park Boys, but weirder. He was a little touchy-feely with the kids, but this was before strict no touching rules at kids programs, so nobody really thought much of it. It was mainly hugging, patting them on the back and letting them sit on his lap. Whenever I worked with him I always did keep an eye on him though, and I never ever left him alone with them because he gave me a weird feeling. After a few months of him working there, My boss comes in while I'm watching a room full of children with him and pulls me into the bathroom. She tells me they were looking into his background. Why they didn't do this before he got hired I have no idea. And it turns out he got in trouble for molesting his little brother and his friend a few years prior. So she asks me to go back to the room and babysit him basically until the cops get there. I realize now how inappropriate it was of them to ask me to do that. I was a 16-year-old girl and it was my first job, and babysitting pedophiles was not what I signed up for. But not wanting to get in trouble, I went back and looked after him until a cop came and escorted him out. Luckily it was uneventful, but he did come over and talk to me and stuff while I tried to not let on how horrified I was. Not sure what happened to him after that. I couldn't find him in the news or anything, but I never saw him again. The really creepy thing is that he tended to make friends with the most vulnerable kids. There was a really obese kid, a kid with severe autism, a kid with crutches, and a couple others who were bullied and stuff that formed this weird little gang he would hang around with. Rug. He made friends with the vulnerable kids because in his mind they are the easiest to prey on and the least willing to say anything due to their disabilities. Hopefully he's away for a long time. A guy in one of my college classes seemed off to me. I don't know why. Just weird little things. Like one time there was spilled water on the ground and he ended up putting his bag in it. He noticed, but pretended there was nothing wrong. Left it there for the entire duration. Then, when class was over, he didn't move from his seat and stayed there after everyone left. I thought it was so odd. A few months later, he was arrested for killing his mother. He was found playing video games while her body decomposed in the next room. That escalated quickly. I took a year off my junior year in college to co-op intern at a company. This one research scientist I worked with seemed normal, but there was just something slightly off with how he interacted with people. Like, and if there was less emotion behind his interactions with his colleagues. A lot of us nerdy engineers have our own quirks. I know I do, so I didn't really think about it much. The time I really stopped and thought to myself how something seemed off though was when I asked him about a picture of a raccoon on his desk. He went into this story about how he and his family had found a baby raccoon, raised it as part of their family like a dog, etc. He then talked about how he had to kill it for whatever reason. So this happened 10 years ago, so I don't remember the exact specifics, but I do remember thinking that the way he described it seemed odd considering he was talking about having to kill a family pet. I grew up on a farm and am accustomed to people having to put their dogs, horses, etc. down, yet this guy didn't seem to have the same reverence that most people do. Anyway, if I had to put a word to it, at the time I felt like the guy had no empathy. Literally 1 week, 2 weekends after the raccoon story he goes on a murder spree. Other than a colleague telling me Monday morning, nobody ever talked about it. Such a weird experience. Well, that story took a turn. I have 2 creepy stories. Both involved my children. My children were young. 2 girls 6 and almost 4 and a boy just about 2. The eldest is now 42, so this was many years ago. The lady in the townhouse across the courtyard was pregnant at the same time I was. She went into labor about a week earlier than her due date and I went with her to the hospital while her husband was located. She delivered just as he arrived, so I was present in the delivery room along with her husband. The baby, a son, had multiple birth complications and died 2 days later. The next day I delivered my son. It was devastating to us all when my friend lost her son, but of course I was so happy to have had mine. I only stayed 24 hours in the hospital, so I was home the day of the funeral. That's when the first creepy thing happened. My friend's husband approached me and asked if I would let her nurse my son to lessen her physical and emotional pain. I refused and his eyes filled with tears. He begged me and I left. The next day, as I was headed into the kitchen to do the dinner dishes, I saw him in the bushes looking into the house. I locked all my doors and windows, took the children upstairs and waited for my husband to get home. We had no phone, so calling the police wasn't an option. My husband plainly told him he was not allowed around me or the children, but didn't speak to his wife. Just days later the man was arrested. He'd tried to take a baby at a local grocery store. I think he wanted to take my son and may have been planning to. That evening I saw him outside the window. My second creep is this. There was a door-to-door insurance salesman that for some reason my husband struck up a friendship with. He seemed to me overly interested in my children. After a month or so of occasionally dropping by socially, he began trying to pull them onto his lap. I was abused as a kid and I could almost smell it on him, but my husband wouldn't listen. He thought the guy was nice and just liked kids. I put my foot down and told my husband that while I wouldn't interfere in their friendship, visits could not take place in the house unless the kids were not present. The salesman lost interest in the friendship with my husband not long after. Within a year he was arrested for trying to molest a little girl in a client's home. My little cousin, 16 at the time, had a boyfriend who was rumored to have Asperger's. We will call them Carly and Tim. I didn't know if the rumor was true, but I did know that I thought Tim was pretty weird. He and Carly would stop over at the house a lot. She didn't like to be around her siblings too much. I'm bad with ages, but one is in 2nd grade and one is in 7th. Whenever they'd come over I wouldn't say much to Tim and just kind of ignored him. My parents would get a little upset after they'd leave and tell me that he's a nice kid and that I need to be nice to him since he's Carly's boyfriend. Well, as time goes on, Tim gets Carly pregnant at 16 and we later find out that he had been molesting my other little cousin, the one in 7th grade, and had tried to molest the littlest one, but she says he failed in trying to do so. Just one of those gut feelings that I wish I could have done something about. Well, I guess your parents were wrong. When I was in high school I worked at an Orange Julius with a girl. I was working there from the ages of 15 to 17. This girl was in her early 20s and her boyfriend was around her age. Every time he came in I never said hi to him, I never talked to him, I just got this very eerie terrible feeling about him, and around the age 15 I had learned to listen to this feeling. Growing up in the ghetto can make you very vigilant. Anyways, so I never talked to this guy while my other co-workers say hi, talk to him, all the normal nice things most do with their co-workers' significant others when they frequent their work. I ended up leaving the job at 17. She left a while before me. I went down to the police station one day to do something I don't remember and saw our most wanted people up on a board, and I was looking at them and saw her boyfriend's face. He was wanted for murder. He had murdered her. I'll never forget the chills that ran down my back when I read that. Still get them when I tell the story. I was in elementary school, maybe 1st or 2nd grade. We had a particularly touchy male gym teacher who would deem little girls his special helpers and take them back into the room where all of the gym equipment was kept so they could assist him in finding the gym equipment. He was particularly touchy-feely, but it wasn't entirely unusual for teachers to make physical contact with their students. I was accustomed to my female grade teachers and secretaries giving hugs and such, so it wasn't super weird to me. He gave me the creeps, but I couldn't justify why. One day my parents sit me down at the kitchen table after school and ask me if my gym teacher had ever touched me. Not knowing what they meant, I told my parents that he touched my shoulder once. My mom burst into tears of relief. Dude had been raping his special helpers. Most of the girls were as young as 6 or 7. Heartwarming that your mom felt such relief, anger at this freaked up man. Not something that happened to me, but my mum. She just had a random feeling that she should visit my grandma one Thursday after getting off work. Usually she just put it off and do it during the weekend, but for some reason, she did it because she felt something was odd. She arrived to see my grandma laying in her bed bleeding from her head. Apparently my grandma had fallen down before that and managed to pull herself back into bed. Ambulance was called and everything went fine after. My whole family shudders at what would have happened if my mum decided not to. My grandpa was in hospice at my grandparents' place. After school, I texted my brother that I was going to pick him up from his high school and we should go see grandpa. Complete spur of the moment thing. It was probably 0.51 hour later that the nurse came into the kitchen where everyone was and said, "It's happening." I have no idea the compulsion was to go there that night. I was young, very young, like around 5 years old. My parents had invited the new guy from work and his wife over for dinner. The wife was friendly, even asked for a tour of the house. I immediately didn't like either of them, just got a really squeamish feeling, but I had been told to be nice. Shortly we all sat down to dinner and mom asked me to say the blessing. I have a standard blessing, but added in my own twist, and God, please forgive Tom and Anita, not their real names, for all the bad things they've done, and for being bad people. Amen. My parents were mortified. After an awkward moment of silence, Anita fake laughed and said it was fine, just kids being kids. I was pretty much ignored by them the whole night after that, though they did offer to come babysit me if my parents wanted to go on a date one night, and seemed very interested on if we were going to be home for Thanksgiving or not. A few weeks later, Mom saw Tom's name on the news headline. She couldn't believe it. She called their house to talk to Anita, but instead the police answered. She hung up and yelled for Dad to come into the room, and they watched the story unfold on the news. Tom and Anita had been arrested for grand theft. They were wanted in several states and even had a nickname with the cops. Tom would break into the homes of their friends, whose houses they had scouted out when they had been invited in previous, and steal whatever Anita pointed out that she wanted. Then they would make a meal with the victim's food, eat it at the victim's table, then leave it there when they were done for the victim to find. The police had confiscated everything they could, and there was so much stuff. Couches, TVs, purses, jewelry, you name it. Then to top it all off, one little old woman who came to the station to get her things back heard Tom's voice from behind a wall and started to shake and cry, then said, "That's the voice of the man who raped me." I'm sure you can imagine the relief my parents felt that they never left me alone with Tom and Anita, and that they didn't tell them where we would be for Thanksgiving, because it was pretty clear that they had marked our house as next. You're welcome for the heads up, Mom and Dad. My friend's ex. Everyone loved him, thought he was the greatest. He repulsed me. Tried to warn my friend, but she wouldn't hear it. I've been known to be hostile to the cool kids wherever I go. Got bullied a lot as a kid, so I thought maybe I was being unfair. He started teaching and got reported for having sex multiple times with a 14-year student. He's well into his 20s. Who knows who else he'd been grooming. I always had a creepy feeling with and about my father. Turned out, he raped his younger sister from ages 9 to 14. My parents divorced after that surfaced. Fast forward 5 years and I'm in trauma therapy for being sexually assaulted for years by him. Why not earlier, you might ask? Because my brain decided to store the memories deep down inside itself, and it only started to surface when the story with him and my aunt unfolded. Not me, but when I was younger, one of my friends would tell me that his mom's boyfriend's kid was a creepy dude and there was something off about him. Turned out that dude had molested an 8-year-old girl multiple times at his mom's daycare. When I was younger, I never wanted to leave my dad and my mom's best friend alone together. I always thought they were going to kiss, which as I got older I realized was crazy. He loved my mom and was married to her, yet he was cheating on my mom for years with a friend. Kids are so aware, especially of subtleties that adults don't notice or write off. Ian Watkins. He was the lead singer of a band called Lost Prophets. He would always walk around Cardiff openly. He knew he was famous and never tried to hide it even years after being famous. Girls would always run up to him for photos and I thought I was just jealous, which was probably a little true, but something about him was always strange. Everyone I knew thought the same. Just something strange about how he interacted with people. Anyway, just Google Ian Watkins and you'll see I was absolutely freaking right. My boyfriend's stepmom. When I met her I really wanted to like her because she was so nice and kind. But my gut told me she wasn't genuine. As I spent more time with my boyfriend, let's call him D, at his house, I began to dread going over because I could literally feel my energy being sucked out of me just by stepping in the door. And it was always because she was in a bad mood. It's insane how much one small woman can change the atmosphere around her. She and D's dad had been separated twice. After a third, they are now divorcing. During the second separation, while D was in college out of state, she took all the money out of a joint account, something like 200 grand. When D needed tuition for the next semester of school, he was told by her, "Sorry, but your education isn't priority right now." And when he asked for something so he could even eat, he was told, "I am sorry that all I have to give you is my love." He was forced to quit school and move back home. And once he did, she had taken a 2-week women's retreat in Bali. With that tuition money, she is hypocritical, a narcissist, mean-spirited, manipulative, and selfish. Oh, the stories I have of her, especially the recent ones during this divorce case. She is refusing to settle because she believes she deserves more money. She tore Dee's family apart. She's keeping Dee's half-sister from her father. She pushed Dee's younger brother to attempted suicide. She isolated Dee's father from his side of the family and his friends and sucked him dry. He is currently in bed for the 5th day in a row, drunk for most of it, because of this divorce case taking all of his sanity. He just wants to see his daughter. That's UHH. Quite a story. I think the best to do is confront her with the dad and sue her, or do something, cause it just ain't right. Also the dad seems to need serious help. IDK if I were you I'd do something ASAP. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.